Just before we move on to continue the examination in chief, just to let everyone know that the webcasting issue has now been resolved, so we are now apparently webcasting live, so we're up to date now. Over to you, Mr. Mann.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dempsey, can you please provide details of the types of survey that were used to inform the baseline for the Killiecrankie battlefield presented in the DMRB Stage 2 assessment?
To inform the DMRB, the cultural heritage inputs to the DMRB Stage 2 assessment, we would have undertaken a desk-based survey, so that involves looking at existing documentary sources of information, for example, the inventory of historic battlefields. It would also have involved a review of cartographic sources, historic sources, and really any other documentary sources of relevance. Site inspections were also undertaken of the battlefield, primarily north of the existing A9. We also would have undertaken a metal detecting survey that was undertaken of areas both north and south of the existing A9. It would have taken place within the areas, the 100-metre corridor that was identified for the PES study. That allowed us to encompass the proposed route options and also allow any remains or any objects recovered to be put in their context. I also would have looked at engineer and topographic surveys and aerial photographs to get and modern maps to get an idea of the topography, so that would have then all been brought together to inform both the baseline and the assessment of impact, and to my mind that is an appropriate level of detail to allow us to identify significant effects and also then to allow a comparison of route options. Just one other important point is through using the company that we chose to undertake the metal detecting survey, that give us access to Professor Pollard's expertise, but also then to the results of the metal detecting survey that was undertaken by Pollard and Oliver in 2003. That allowed us to match the descriptions in Pollard and Oliver's book to the ground, but also filled in some of the gaps, for want of a better word, where potentially due to ground conditions or the presence of livestock, we couldn't undertake metal detecting in 2015.
And what further work was undertaken in 2018, and what conclusions were you able to draw from that?
In 2018, we undertook metal detecting survey, geophysical survey, and archaeological trial trenching. Again, the metal detecting was undertaken in areas to the north and to the south of the existing A9, geophysical survey to the south of the existing A9, so it encompassed the CPO LMA as it stood then, the proposed scheme, but also an area around it to put the results in context. The archaeological trial trenching comprised trial trenching of potential anomalies that were identified as possible burial pits by a geophysical survey undertaken for the scheme in 2016. That proved that they were not burial pits, and we also then undertook analysis of LiDAR. The results really confirmed the Stage 2 and the Stage 3 baselines and the assessment of impact.
Moving on, were only physical impacts on the battlefield assessed?
No, physical impacts on the battlefield were assessed, but they weren't the only type of impacts assessed at DMRB Stage 2 or DMRB Stage 3. If I could just find the appropriate part of my recognition, it's detailed in section 4.4. We would have undertaken an assessment based on the manage and change in historic. For DMRB Stage 2, the guidance was provided by manage and change in the historic environment, historic battlefields, the edition that was published in 2011. In line with that, we would have assessed both physical impacts in the battlefield, but then also contextual changes as well. So changes that would result to topography, potential for impact in views across the battlefield, where the elements of the battlefield where setting would have provided a contribution to the value of elements within the battlefield. So example for tomb clavers, where we know it was important for commemoration. We would have also assessed impacts on the setting of those elements. So we would have looked at the whole range of potential impacts as identified in the 2011 guidance. That was in 2016, the current manage and change guidance was published. We would have used that to identify key landscape characteristics and special qualities of the battlefield. Special qualities are the archaeological remains. I would understand that key landscape characteristics are the battlefield terrain and how that contributes to the value of the battle, and our understanding of it. Again, depending on the nature of the either special quality or key landscape characteristic, we would have looked at setting, largely for the special quality. So again, we would have looked at tomb clavers and the setting, the potential impacts for setting of that, and that would have been considered for the large majority of special qualities. We would have taken into account elements such as severance, so not only the physical severance, like such as the removal of topography or unknown archaeological remains or battlefield objects associated with the battle. We would also then have looked at how increasing the width of a road line or infrastructure within a road line would have impacted on the visual impact, the visual connectivity between the north side and south side of the road. But also beyond that, and largely at operation, how it would impact on our ability to understand that connection, the mental connection that we would have between the north side and the south side of the road as well. That approach we also took in the design development report. I think it's TS 206, where we would have looked, where we assessed the alternative scheme, and indeed one of the main reasons for a differentiator and a larger impact is the severance during operation between the north side and the south side of the battlefield that would result from the large cutting that we've discussed previously.
And I think, Mr. Dempsey, a useful reference point in terms of what you've just said, be paragraph 10.1.23 of the development of the scheme report. Perhaps with reference to the drawing TS 414.28, which it would be useful to have up on the screen, could you identify, wait for that to come up, TS 414.28. TS-414.28. Could you please identify for the inquiry the location of the line of the government forces in fields F6 and F7, and talk us through why that is your position?
The line of the government forces is marked by the red blocks. So approximately in the area, shown in the area now, they would have been identified on the basis of the information in the historical accounts, primarily Mackay, who led the government forces. We understand that he marched up from the area marked as Claverhouse's Stone. This was his preliminary position whenever he found out that the Jacobites, as shown in blue, had been duped. The Jacobites, rather than marching straight down from Blair, had actually occupied the higher ground. So he performed what was called a quarter conversion. So I turned to the right and moved up the slope to the area shown. We also understand from later accounts that he would have kept an earlier garden around Erd House to his back, and was also want to have maintained a straight line from Balcroic, which is a little hill wreathed with trees, unfortunately not shown in this drawing, stretching from that to the Alt Gurnaig. The positioning makes best use of the topography. The areas hatched in pink are level ground. It reflects the position shown in the inventory, but I think more importantly it also reflects the location that was identified by Pollard and Oliver in their book, their book Two Men in the Trench 2, and their television programme of the same name. And I think it would be worthwhile if we could turn to a segment of that video, because it provides quite a good snapshot of where they have positioned the line in relation to topographical elements that can still be seen on the ground today. So if we could play that, please. And
for everybody's notes, understand that this is TS-401, and we're looking at 44 minutes and 33 seconds into the programme.
Where the ground starts to drop away.
The topographical survey showed that because of the stepping effect, the Jacobite troops were receiving at least partial cover from the government guns when they were temporarily both out of sight and out of range at the back of the terrace.
If we could just pause it there for a minute, please. And could we bring up the previous figure? Just to provide a bit of context there into exactly where we're looking at and what we're looking at. The band of trees that are visible in the background is the area that Mr. Robertson talked about yesterday and was visible from our site inspection. So this is the approximate area that we're looking at here. There's a sizable slope down from where the program starts, or the section of the program starts, down to where the position of the government troops, where I've located the position of the government troops. So you'll hear me, and as shown on that drawing, refer to first step terrace and second step terrace. So this is field F7. Can we?
Battlefield further supported this theory.
There's triple of them going right along the top of the country.
Wow.
So line of them goes up to you, and then three just down at the bottom of the fence there.
That's on a Wales.
Could we just pause it there for a minute, please, and bring back up the previous? Is it okay if I stand up and shout?
The mic will still need to pick you up for the webcast.
Okay, I'll see what. It's a bit pop starish.
Don't hold it by the stock. Come on.
I think just for point of reference, this trickle of shot that that is referred to, we've just seen, is the blue dots. The blue dots here on what I've identified in that figure as first step terrace. The shot down below that's referred to in the programme is just these two elements of shot here, marked in blue. So just for general reference, the blue marks the munitions or the battlefield objects that were recovered by Pollard and Oliver. The red by the 2015 metal detecting undertaken by Guard Archaeology on behalf of the project, and the green, the 2018 metal detecting undertaken by Headland Archaeology on behalf of the project. So again, just that those blue dots are the areas that we've just seen in the video.
None on the same. Everyone's highly busy. This is incredible because you've got more than a line, which means that you've probably got a volley from the government line, which must have been down there. So I go down there, that's where the government soldiers were. A lot of dead ground. Exactly. And you move in, if you start with friends, you move in, and I'll tell you when I can see you. And I bet it just about corresponds to where we're finding these bullets. Some of these are probably misses, but some have probably got through people. Neil, I can't see you at all. If you start walking forward, I'll tell you when I can see you. Right, your head's just coming to view there. This is about where the spread of musket balls is. Right, I get a decent body shot about there. This is where the spread is. That's where the flags are. That's where I would have given the order for my men to open fire. So that's the volley coming in. Unbelievable. It's a snapshot in the battle. Would explain how these Jacobites had made it through the barrage of gunfire without losing the momentum. But in the hand-to-hand combat that we followed,
Thanks very much.
they were heavily outnumbered.
And can we bring up the previous figure, please? So in summary, based on that, we understand that Pollard and Oliver would have placed the government forces at the foot of that large terrace or sizable terrace in field F7. That's evidenced by munitions that they identified and also by munitions identified in 2018. At the top of the terrace, at the top of the terrace is another group of munitions, and again located probably about 30 metres outside of the CPO and LMA. But really, I think the key point is that the line of the government forces is potentially over 100 metres, probably more, from the LMA. I would need to check that distance, but it's probably around that. The spread of musket balls that would mark where there would be the majority of Jacobite casualties would have occurred is also located outside the CPO and LMA. This spread of musket balls correlates quite well to a distance of about 180 metres from the government lines to the concentration on the terrace in Field F7, which equates to about the 100 paces that Mackay states he asked his men to open fire at. So the evidence would suggest that Step 1, both Step 1 and Step 2 are located outside of the LMA and CPO for the proposed scheme, and therefore there would be no impact on these steps.
Mr. Dempsey, do you agree with the combined group's belief that the most sensitive part of the battlefield should be equated with the area where the fighting was concentrated?
No, I don't agree with that assessment. It doesn't align with to base sensitivity solely on the concentration of fighting doesn't align with the guidance provided by Manage and Change in the Historic Environment, either 2011 edition or the 2016 edition. The guidance requires us to identify the areas of key landscape characteristics or special qualities that would have contributed most significantly to the battlefield. These are located both north and south of the proposed scheme. Historic Environment Scotland recognise this in their withdrawal letter. As can be seen just towards the top corner of that figure, there's concentration of munitions in Field F13, which is located to the north of the road. There's also areas to the north of the road. There's terracing to the north of the road. There's also the possible location of the sniper's house that played a key part in the battlefield. So based on guidance and based on the physical evidence, I would say, no, I do not agree that equating the most sensitive part of the battlefield with an area of concentration.
Now, if you were to adopt the combined group's rationale about this concentration of fighting being the most sensitive part of the battlefield, what is your view on the impact of the proposed scheme on that area?
As intimated earlier, I would suggest that it is in this area still located out with the LMA and CPO. There would be no impact on the first step terrace and the distribution of munitions. There would be no impact on the second step terrace, and the area between them quite approximately would have been where the most casualties would have occurred. So in this area it's located outside the scheme and there would be no impact on them.
Thank you. Can you please confirm your understanding for the inquiry of the line of the government forces in Field F6 and F7 as you understand that to be interpreted by the combined group?
I think to do that it would be beneficial to run through the video that was produced by the combined group for the soldiers of Killiecrankie in December 2019.
Yes, this is the video that we're having to stream live. TS-436.
If we could just pause it there, please. Sir, as you'll potentially remember from our site visit and as seen in the previous video, that line of trees was also visible in the Pollard and Oliver video. The step that they stood on was just visible as the camera panned around. The LMA is located just within this tree line, so therefore the area we're standing on at the minute is outside the CPO area. The land made available is located slightly within the trees as well. So this area, as Mr. Robertson has stated yesterday, is not within CPO, but rather the CPO and LMA are located within the tree line. If we could play on, please.
So we're standing here right on one of the main steps that affects the outcome of the Killiecrankie. Behind us, where I'm looking towards, you can imagine yourself facing Leven's regiment, which had swung round and fought the conversion, and they fired into this ground, mainly occupied by the Cameron regiment as they advanced towards the government line. I'm just going to walk up to the top, please. If you turn around and swing the camera on, you can see there is an element of a step just on the tree line and near the red marker. Now, as I walk up the steps, I'm actually going up the steps, and you can see behind me to my right, there is the Transport Scotland marker. This is the ground that will be occupied by the new carousel. And as you can clearly see, it will remove this step.
If we could just pause it there, please, for a moment again. This step, my field interpretation of that is that it isn't a natural feature, that it is a ramp to provide access to the mound that is immediately behind Mr. Rattray, as shown in the video at present. That's about 10:24. My rationale or reasons for that interpretation is that from the ground investigation that took place within that band of trees, there's evidence for a considerable amount of topsoil, up to 1.3 metres deep. I can't think of a natural pedogenical process that would result in such depth of topsoil, especially where elsewhere in the scheme the topsoil is approximately 300 mil, 400 mil thick. that would suggest to me that certainly the area within the trees is a man-made feature associated with the construction of the existing A9. Further evidence for that comes from an aerial photograph, CD-40, and if you'll indulge me further, I wouldn't mind bringing that up to take a look at it, because again it contributes to the interpretation not only of the features that we're looking at, but of disturbance wider in the battlefield. For context, as we're waiting for that, it's an aerial photograph dating to 1988, which is just after, really, the road opened. If we could zoom into approximately this area here, please. And again to this area here, please. The quality mightn't, the quality is quite poor in this scan. Just for context, Erd House walled garden, and the steadings and the existing A9. It mightn't be too clear in this version, but you can see the mound here without trees on it, but with a very square end on it. You can also see where a wall's been removed, so a wall here and a wall here, and also then a bit removed in the middle. What one can also see in this area is a mound of presumed surplus material, and mounds here as well. Again, looking at changes in vegetation, and apologies it's not very clear in this video, but there is a change in vegetation here, and also then some of which would have resulted from the construction of the embankment from the existing A9, but also for me the linear nature of it and the fact it connects two areas of surplus material suggests for me a haul road, and therefore that would lead me to the interpretation that what Mr. Rattray has identified is not a natural feature but is a man-made feature. That's also supplemented by, yes, you can see just a difference in coloration of the vegetation. The mound of material here, this is the area of Lagnabuig where disturbance is also visible, and this is the area of tree now planted, but it's just the fact it's continuous with this area of change in vegetation indicated by a change in colour visible in the photograph and the removal of the wall there. So that would support, along with the ground investigation information, would support that there's been disturbance, and actually this is a man-made feature, and the sloping wedge-shaped nature of that, where it tapers down, would also suggest for me that it's not natural, but is man-made as well. So if we could go back to the video, please, and
now there is an argument this step was created in the creation of the first A9. I would seriously question that, because it was continuous for a long line. So for the battlefield interpretation, it is these steps, as we are informed from all the accounts at the time, were crucial to understanding the choreography of the battle. So the step behind me, looking into the trees there, was potentially the last step the Highlanders the Camerons advanced over before they confronted Mackay's regiment, who were in the field to our right down there. Just to put it in context, the battle, it is widely agreed, turned at this point. So the Camerons advanced here across this ground, the step behind me, advanced it very aggressively, but at this point here, they were hit by pretty effective fire from Leven's regiment, and in Cameron O'Loughill's own account, he talks about how important the understanding of his own men was, and he had previously gone around to each man in his regiment explaining what they needed to do. At this spot where we're now...
Thank you. Could you bring up the previous figure that shows the distribution of munitions, please? I think it's important to note at this point, sir, that we're within where Mr. Rattray was standing is within Field F6. Field F6 was metal detected at 100% coverage in 2015 by Guard Archaeology on behalf of the project. As can be seen from the distribution, there was no munitions identified from that possible step or terrace that Mr. Rattray is describing. From memory, one horseshoe was recovered from that area, but I can confirm that if required, sir. But there certainly wasn't a concentration of munitions of the sort as can be seen in my location for the first step terrace on drawing TS 414.28.
Could you, Mr. Dempsey, just point me to where Mr. Rattray was on that?
I beg your pardon, sir. I'm trying to juggle too many things, I think. Sir, Mr. Oh dear. Thank you very much. Mr. Rattray, I'd understand, would be... I'm sorry, that's a very bad... If I could get a better quality of shot. Sorry, Mr. Rattray would have been in that area there. I'll just point... Sorry, it's just... would have been approximately, there's a field boundary that isn't very visible, but would have been approximately in the area here. No, yeah. If we could continue to play the video, please.
Nearly 100 to 120 Camerons were killed. Now, it is really quite spine-tingling for me to be standing on this ground and to know so many people died, but also to know that the Cameron clan still had the resolution and the ferocity to advance across the ground and decimate Mackay's regiment at the edge of this ridge. General Hugh Mackay had clearly given orders to his regiments to give their fire at 100 paces. As the enemy reached 100 paces, they were ordered to fire. If we walk down this ridge here, you can imagine the ground I'm walking over now was covered by the Cameron regiment. But as I go past this tree, stepping down, you look down here, you can see the red marks, which have all been destroyed by the construction of the A9. Then moving down here, at this point, they not only withstood the fire of Leven's regiment behind Canberra, but also came into the fire from Mackay's regiment, who occupied the position on the step there. This was of crucial importance. The Highlanders had the tenacity, having lost 100 of their number, to still advance and obliterate Mackay's regiment in hand-to-hand fighting So just out of interest, I'm now going to pace from the step ground where I'm standing towards where Mackay's regiment was. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're now going down a steep drop from a step. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So this is 70 yards. If you
We could just pause it there, please. Just again, just with reference to the map and what we've seen previously, the area that Mr. Rattray's just paced out to would be just approximately where the shot is shown, the distribution of shot is shown. So just at the very edge of first step terrace as indicated. So approximately this area here, as can be seen, it's located outside of the LMA and CPO, and there would be no impact on it. As a point of interpretation, it would be hard. If Mr. Rattray has suggested that Levin's regiment would have swung round and open fired. If the government lines, if those blue dots, if that distribution of ammunition does indeed represent government fire, they would, and the government Mackay's regiment was located in this regiment in this area, they would have been, to my interpretation, firing on their own men. I also think it's important to note that the key part of the terraces is that they provided a strategic advantage to the Jacobites, as Pollard and Oliver have described. The terraces shielded the Jacobites, given the location, the relative location of the government forces as described by Mr. Rattray. Any charge in Jacobites would be highly visible on his location for the first step, and therefore there would be no tactical advantage. And if we could just play the rest of the video, please.
and were facing a Highland army on the hills behind us. The question is, would you have positioned your line on the top of this ridge or at the bottom? I, for one, would have preferred to position at the top, because the top would give you the best chance of defending yourself with the flat ground in front of you. And we can see this step to our left. I believe this forms the main killing ground for the Battle of Killiecrankie. And it's on this ground that many men lost their lives, both on the government side. Mackay's regiment was completely decimated, but also in the Cameron regiment and amongst other Highlanders. This was the real killing ground of the battlefield of Killiecrankie. If we look behind us...
Thank you very much. I think just in summary to that, the location of for me, the location of the government forces in that terrace, and Mr. Rattray's explanation, tactical explanation rather, misses the point that Mackay either didn't choose his line well enough or couldn't move his men to take to allow them the sort of fire, as for want of a better word, that Mr. Rattray has described, and that plus the evidence from the distribution of shot and the evidence from interpretation, but also from the GI, which suggests that the step isn't a natural feature but is man-made, would suggest that the combined group have mislocated the government forces. But accepting Mr. Milne's point, the government line would still be outside the CPO LMA, and there would be no impact on them.
As a separate question, Mr. Dempsey, will the proposed scheme impact on Lagnabuig?
I think it's important to note that Lagnabuig has been heavily disturbed. If I could just find a reference to a figure, it's an easier way to talk through what's happening in that area. If you could open document TS 414.31. So this shot shows the approximate location of Lagnabuig, dotted in green, I suppose that colour is, along with both the CPO and land made available. It's superimposed on aerial photographs. The bottom left is a modern aerial photograph. The black and white image is the one that we looked at earlier, CD40. And then the top right is an aerial photograph from 2007. And also then the bottom right is the LiDAR data. And the CPO and LMA are showing on those. What can be seen from those is from the aerial photograph CD40 from 1988, there's areas of disturbance visible. The shown as areas of white on that photograph is what I interpret as areas of dumping and of spoil. There's also towards the centre of that image, and at the area indicated now, there's a dump of spoil that's shown, that's visible still in the ground today. That's also then visible on the LiDAR data as well. So that plus the evidence from the ground investigation, which we've submitted into evidence, suggests a large degree of dumping with made ground ranging from 3 metres in depth to about 0.4, 0.5 metres in depth. That the process of creating those mounds and dumping the material would have significantly reduced the potential for unknown archaeological remains and would have removed or truncated any archaeological remains that would have been present within those areas. If we could just recenter slightly to the aerial photograph from 2007, please. Again, that dump of material. Sorry, sir, have you got it? Again, that dump of material is visible. I'll just stand up again. The dump of material is visible in the centre, but also what you can see is an additional bund, and again they're visible on the ground and also visible also hopefully just discern horizontal striations.
Sorry, I've just realised you don't have your microphone.
Sorry, sir. Would you like me to go through that again, sir? Sorry, what can be seen here again is that possible dump of surplus material that's visible on the ground today, and also in the LiDAR data. There is also a bund visible, which again is visible on the ground today and visible in the LiDAR data. There is also horizontal striations visible, and I would interpret those to be ground preparation for the planting of trees that we are now visible today. The combined effect to that would be that, again, associated with the earlier disturbance visible from the aerial photograph, but also from the ground investigation, would be to have truncated or removed any archaeological remains that were present, and also then that would have significantly reduced the potential for unknown archaeological remains that were present. And if we just could take a look, please, if we could just go to the bottom right. And this is just to illustrate with reference to the LiDAR, the mound visible, the bund visible, and areas of potential previous disturbance visible. It's important to note as well, with reference to this, the red line marks the land made available, while the yellow, sorry, I beg your pardon, the red line marks a CPO, the yellow, the land made available. So there will be disturbance within this area, but as can be seen, there's evidence for disturbance by a bund, and the GI in this area suggests dumping of made ground up to 3 metres in depth. Within the CPO in this area, the trees will be retained for ecological mitigation, as I understand it. The erection of red squirrel boxes, grey boxes, but also then bat boxes as well. This is quite a light touch mitigation, so therefore there will be no disturbance in this area that would lead to impacts on archaeological remains. And then there would be a band of trees that would be retained. So to answer Mr. Mullen's question, there is potential for limited impact on Lag na Buig, but that's tempered by the degree of disturbance that has already occurred, but also by the fact that the excavations that were undertaken by Pollard and Oliver in 2003, and where some of the extant remains located within or actually on the edge of the CPO, were excavated date to the 19th century, and which would suggest that any surviving remains would be of a comparable date and not associated with the battle.
You touched on this point earlier, but can I ask for your response to following question? Do you consider the area of the battlefield to the north of the existing A9 to be of lower value than the south side?
No, I don't consider that the area to the north of the A9 is of lower value of the battlefield. As described, there's key landscape characteristics and special qualities both north and south of the battlefield, and therefore I just don't consider that it's of less sensitivity. And I would, based on the withdrawal letter from Historic Environment Scotland, they that the comments made within that letter would support that suggestion, and I'll just, if you give me a moment, I'll just find those references within my precognition.
Mr. Dempsey, you may in the first instance wish to refer to TS-440.23, Historic Environment Scotland's Letter of Objection of 23rd January 2018. And the 8th page of the annex to that letter, which is a continuation of what Historic Environment Scotland have to say about key landscape characteristics and special qualities.
TS 408.47. Sorry, are we looking at TS 408.47?
I think we were taken to point 23 first of all. I was going to refer you to the paragraph beginning, the features noted above, including the topography. Maybe complete that paragraph for me and let me know what you take from that.
Yes, sorry. The features noted above, including the topography of the southern slopes of Craigellach, are all key landscape characteristics of the battlefield. Metal detecting has recovered many finds directly related to the fighting on both north and south sides of the A9. The battlefield has confirmed potential to contain archaeological remains related to the battle, which are an important resource and one of its special qualities. So my interpretation of what HES are stating there is that the objects related to the battlefield are special qualities of Killiecrankie battlefield as they were identified in the environmental statement, but that they occur both north and to the south of the A9, which would again suggest that the area to the south of the A9, or the area where there's the highest concentration of interpreted by Mr. Rattray as the highest concentration of fighting, is not the most sensitive area.
Was there another letter that you wish to take the inquiry to, Mr. Dempsey?
I have it of the withdrawal letter of the 22nd of January 2019, TS 408.47. And if you're content, I'll quote from my precognition, which quotes the letter. HES state that due to the nature of overall alignment, the proposed works would occur in the central part of the battlefield, where the Jacobite charge approached and engaged the government line. The variable terraces and slopes here had an important influence in the battle, as they offered protection to the advancing Jacobites and restricted the opportunities for the government troops to fire upon them. Artefacts found to the north of the A9 relate to munitions exchanged during the battle. Hand-to-hand fighting probably occurred along the government line to the south of the A9. The existing A9 cuts through the central part of the battlefield, where topography played a key role in the outcome of the battle, and physical remains related to fighting have been found. They then also go on to state the information presented during 2018 in the environmental statement confirmed the distributions of battlefield-related objects, which are a special quality of the battlefield, lie to both north and south of the existing carriageway. As identified above, the balance of evidence suggests that the existing carriageway cuts through the central part of the battlefield, where the Jacobite charge approached and engaged the government line, and artefacts related to the fighting are known to exist. The variable terraces and slopes here had an important influence on the battle, and the A9 cuts through these, leaving important elements to both south and north.
Could I take you to TS-206, Appendix N for November? And that's page 142 of the PDF, which contains the main report. So that's TS-206, the main report, which has Appendix N for November included in it, page 142. And under the table, which is comparing the refined scheme with the alternative design, could you read out for us, please, the second bullet point under the alternative design, under the heading of construction, Killiecrankie battlefield historic landscape type?
Alternative design would result in the removing of surviving archaeological artefacts and remains associated with the battle under the footprint of the proposed scheme in fields F1, F10 and F13.
And my final point at this stage, who or which body performed the role of curator in 2018 in respect of the metal detecting survey undertaken then, and to which you've referred in evidence?
That role was performed by Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust. So we agreed the nature of the works with required in 2018 with Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust and Historic Environment Scotland. We, Jacobs, on behalf of Transport Scotland, produced what is called a written scheme of investigation. That's a specification that sets out the works that are done. That was agreed with both Historic Environment Scotland, but also with Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust in their role as curator. Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust, in their role as curator, undertook monitoring visits during the metal detecting and the archaeological investigation, so they would have come to site to make sure that the works were being undertaken and undertaken in line with the written scheme of investigation. They would also then have reviewed a draft of the report and would have signed off on the report to indicate that they were content with the results of it.
Would the Trust as curator have commented if they had any concerns about the sufficiency of the approach?
It is my understanding, yes, the Trust would have commented if they had any concerns about the consistency of the approach. They didn't during the monitoring visit or subsequently, or during their time when they reviewed the report.
were any steps taken in respect of any of the locations which were surveyed in order to clear those locations of vegetation, such as long grass?
Yes, that is correct. There was vegetation clearance undertaken from memory, field F7, F8, so the terrace that we looked at, because that was understood to be one of the key areas of concern. That was undertaken by Earth Estates on behalf of the project. Field F9 as well, which is immediately to the east of F7, F8, but also in Skirmish Field 2 as well, where a specialist vegetation clearance contractor was brought in to cut down the vegetation to make sure that the metal detecting could be undertaken in a robust manner.
Thank you for bearing with me, Mr. Dempsey. I have no further questions at this stage.
Thanks for that, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Bax.
Thank you, Mr. Dempsey. First off, there are a number of issues in relation to Mr. Rattray, who will be giving evidence later on. I think if he can address those particular points, I'd like to leave that to him, particularly the video.
Yes, I think if you're leading Mr. Rattray when he's giving his evidence, you'll be able to ask him to comment on the evidence given by Mr. Dempsey. Perfect,
thank you. Just if we can take a step back to the role of the inventory, because I was interested in your colleague's response that its existence, although was another factor to take into account, was not something that had any unusual relevance. I was just wondering, again for you, whether the fact the inventory came into being in 2011 made any difference to your assessment of the historical assets that we're looking at here.
Battlefields would have been identified in previous studies before the inventory. For example, on the AWPR scheme, I picked up from old map in the Hill of Muckles, which is a non-inventory battlefield, and impacts on those would have been assessed. So battlefields would have been cultural heritage assets that would have been picked up in EIA. Through the inventory, it became a statutory designation, and they're protected through policies in the local plans, so it would have become a material consideration that the ministers would have to look at in their determination of schemes such as this. As explained in my precognition, we would have assessed the inventory battlefield to be of high value. That's as a result of its designation as a battlefield, but also because of I think the statement that we make in both the Stage 2 assessment and also then, paragraph 14.3.38 of the Cultural Heritage Chapter 14 of the DMRB Stage 2 assessment, but also in paragraph 8.1.17 of Appendix A 15.1 of the Environmental Statement. We state that in consideration of its considerable historic importance, potential for unknown remains, folklore associations and inclusion in the inventory, Killiecrankie battlefield has been assessed to be of high value. So it would have been it would influence us in terms of being another cultural heritage asset, but an important cultural heritage asset, and that's reflected in the assessment of high value in the DMRB Stage 2 and DMRB Stage 3 assessments.
And was that what you were referring to when you talked earlier in your about the DMRB saying that you had to pay special regard to historical assets? That is actually in the DMRB.
Well, special regard is a term for listed buildings under the Listed Building Act. Cultural heritage is defined by the Faro Convention, and a definition of which can be found in Chapter 2 of DMRB, Volume 11, Section 3, Part 2, is quite a wide-ranging definition, and therefore cultural heritage assets such as battlefields would have been included in that under the EIA regs. I would have been included in that under road schemes. The definition as well under the EIA regs 1999, or the topic to be included is, I think it's cultural heritage and architectural heritage. So again, it's quite wide-ranging. So we would have brought in sites such as battlefield under the EIA regs, and as I've explained, AWP are almost irrespective of the inventory, but the inventory through its protection under the development plan policies has given it extra weight, I would say.
I thank you for that. Also, perhaps just to clarify whether you would have mentioned to your colleagues quite early on the process the concern about earthworks, and whether that you suggested to them that additional infrastructure such as laybys wouldn't be such a good idea to include within the designated battlefield boundary.
At both stages of assessment, there's a degree of iteration in the design, where designs are assessed, and the impact of those designs are assessed by the various topic specialists. So in my case, cultural heritage. We would also have noted Historic Environment Scotland's concern with regard to earthworks. That iterative process where the design iterations are assessed means that there is a degree of discussion and back and forward within the teams on issues to see can the impacts be avoided or reduced or mitigated in line with the principles, the key tenets of EIA. So there probably would have been discussions, and certainly as part of the design refinement there was discussions about the need for laybys within the battlefield. But again, there's, as part of working as a design team, is the need to understand those issues and limitations and the need for balance. But that doesn't mean that you don't question why design elements are required.
Can you recall any specific instance of discussion about laybys and the resultant impact on earthworks?
Not through the stage 2 assessment or the stage 3. No specific instances. It's part of the ongoing process, the ongoing dialogue. It would have been something that we discussed certainly in the light of HES's concerns and Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust's concerns. But again, it would have been the understanding that the safety considerations would have been an important influence on the design.
Did the objections from HES and PKHT come as a surprise to you?
I would say the battlefield has and continues to be a key concern for everyone. We had undertaken the works in line with a scoping study that was prepared. The scoping study was issued to Historic Environment Scotland and Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust, as Perth and Kinross Council, I beg your pardon, and that set out the works to be undertaken. My understanding is as well that we met with their presentation was provided to the Environmental Steering Group on the scheme and the mitigation, and especially relaxing slopes, and no negative comments were received. So it did, and we, based on the draft comments, again, I can't stress enough that these were comments on the draft environmental statement. We subsequently met with Historic Environment Scotland to discuss their comments. So I think that objection in that case, for me personally, came as a surprise.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we just take a moment? I don't want to spend too long on it, but just go through the various assets that are identified within the inventory, and that's basically the 5 assets I think we've talked about. The first of which is Lagnaberg, which we heard from you earlier on in some detail. There are a couple of points I just wanted to make on that, in that you do correct something that occurred in the Guard report, which I believe now you're saying was a mistake, that they said originally they identified some evidence of significance in Lagnaberg, but now we're moving that to Croft-Carnock. Is that?
That is correct. Just to provide a bit of context, Mr. Vaxa, 4.5.13 of my precognition, page 25 of my paper copy.
That's the 5 lead munitions.
That's right.
That were recovered.
So
we had understood them to be at Lagnaberg, but that's not correct.
That's not correct. We, in paragraph 8.4 of the 2015 Guard report, that's document CD 036, Guard had identified, had made the following statement: a total of 5 lead munitions were recovered from the area east of Lagnaberg farmstead, possibly representing the engagement with those in a sniper position in Mackay's account. I went back to Guard and asked them the question, did they mean Lagnaberg or was it Croft-Carnock? And Guard responded that it wasn't Lagnaberg, it was Croft-Carnock. We've lodged that document, sir, under TS 419. I think it's also important to note that the reference was with regard to, it's also important to note that there's no archaeological remains were identified by the Geophysical Survey in 2018 in Field F3, and there's also a lack of, the metal detecting has also indicated or hasn't recovered many munitions, a concentration of munitions which one would expect with a redoubt or a sniper's position at Lagnaberg. And that then tallies with the evidence of limited metal detecting that was undertaken in Lagnaberg in 2003 and the recovery of the results of the excavation, which indicated that the structures, or certainly the structure excavated, was of 19th century date and therefore later than the battle.
And you only just found out the mistake in November 2019, was that?
I would have understood it. I think I probably always just read it as Croft-Carnock. The position as doesn't, as Pollard and Oliver have suggested, both in their program, in the television program, but also in their book, Lagna Buig was one area where they had looked to see was it a sniper's position. The evidence didn't suggest that, as the evidence suggested that the structures there were later than the battle. There was no battle-related objects recovered, and also then, more importantly, it doesn't tally with the historical accounts. Mackay states that the sniper's position was on his right wing, opposite, his regiment, Mackay's regiment, which would have been located approximately in Field F7, where we were looking at. Lagna Buig is on Mackay's left wing, so it didn't tally with the historical accounts either.
Thank you for that. But on Lagna Buig, is it still your view that that it's no more than a 19th century barn, and you perhaps don't accept the evidence provided by KFCC 42 and 43, provided by the objectors, that a dwelling did exist at Lagna Buig in the mid-18th century? What we're trying to say is that whereas there was obviously a 19th century barn and evidence of that has been found, that doesn't preclude the existence of earlier dwellings. The archaeological evidence may have been distorted by the previous works done on the original A9, but the importance of Lagna Buig as a place is still relevant, if only by association.
Again, sir, I've dealt with this in paragraph 4.5.12 of my precognition. The evidence presented by the combined group suggests a mid-18th century date, so 1700s. That was already known with reference to Roy's military survey, which identifies a settlement in this area. Again, it doesn't provide evidence that there was a settlement here at the time of the battle, or that a settlement was associated with the battle if it was there. I think that's also then reflected, to my mind, in the statement made on page 16 of the inventory of historic battlefields, Battle of Killiecrankie. So that's document CD 424. If you wish, I can read it out for your... the inventory of historic battlefields, Battle of Killiecrankie, on page 16 makes the following statement regarding Lagna Buig. Roy's map shows two farmsteads in the battlefield as little clusters of buildings. One of these settlements, Lagna Buig, partially survives adjacent to the A9, which has destroyed the majority of the settlement. One of the structures was excavated in 2003 and proved to be a barn used into the 19th century. This building is likely to post-date the battle, and it indicates that the settlement indicated on Roy's map survived for some considerable time. However, it is not known whether Lagna Buig as a whole was present in 1689, although the skirmishing related to Jacobite snipers indicates that the accounts only mention buildings where they took an active part in the battle, as only the contemporary accounts come from the men who had to flee the battlefield to escape. It is possibly unsurprising that details of farm settlements were not recorded. And also, like another bit of evidence comes from Perth and Kinross Historic Environment Record for Lagna Buig, which states that two sites which may have been the position used by Jacobite forces to fire on the government line during the Battle of Killiecrankie. Lagna Buig has been largely discounted due to its position and lack of any metal finds during the fieldwork on the site. Croft Carnock, on the other hand, has produced a range of small finds which may complement the theory that it was used as a sniping position on the 27th of July 1689. So the evidence again from the inventory and from the HER suggests that there's very little to associate Lagnabuig with the Battle of Killiecrankie. And also, as suggested earlier on, my presignation, this area has been heavily disturbed, which would have significantly reduced the potential for unknown archaeological remains to survive. And also the areas of Lagnabuig outside the LMA but within the CPO will be preserved because they will not be used for construction. They will be used for the erection of ecological mitigation.
Would that be a sensible point to take a quick comfort break?
Yes, yes.
Yep.
By all means.
Good. Okay, let's break until 25 past.
Yes, Mr. Dempsey, I think we'd done with Lagnabuig, but the next asset listed as the memorial cairn, sometimes called tomb clavers. Am I right in thinking that's been, you downplay that because it's not listed as a feature within the grounds of Urrod House? Is there any relevance with that?
No, I wouldn't say we downplay it because it's not listed. It was identified in the DMRB Stage 2 assessment as what we termed, in line with the guidance, as a key battlefield landscape element. At that stage, we didn't identify any physical impact. I think, sorry, this is with reference to section 4.6 of my recognition.
4611, yes.
Well, that's from the refined scheme I was talking about, stage 2. So at stage 2 under 4.6.5, we would identify it as a key battlefield landscape element. We would have assessed an impact on it. There's no physical impact on the proposed, from any of the route options, and because of the distance from the route options, and also then because of the retention of vegetation identified at stage 2, no impact was identified at stage 2, but it was identified as a receptor and as under the terminology current then and under the 2011 guidance as a key battlefield landscape element. We also then identified it as a special quality of the battlefield, and that's really a change in terminology from the 2011 to the 2016 guidance. So it was identified as a special quality, and that was in line with the guidance provided by Manage and Change in the Historic Battlefield 2016 guidance. And on page 16, sir, if you're content, I'll quote, special qualities do not have to be contemporary with the battle. Recent memorials to a battle or individuals involved in it are often significant features in the current landscape of a battlefield. Such memorials can be the focus for commemoration or remembrance and make a clear contribution to our understanding and appreciation of the battlefield. So while, as the archaeological evidence suggests, it isn't a tomb, it is a cenotaph, and it is a more modern memorial which enjoys no statutory designation, we would have taken it into account. It would have been assessed as a special quality of the battlefield. But again, given it's outside the LMA and CPO, it's about 70 metres from construction. There's trees which would screen it from construction and operation, as we have identified. We didn't identify or assess any visual impact on its setting. and also then during construction, and as will be reflected in Dr. Palmer's recognition, with the implementation of mitigation measures identified in section 17.5 of the environmental statement, it is anticipated that any potentially significant adverse effects associated with the construction of the proposed scheme are unlikely to arise, and any that do would be short-term in nature. So therefore, during construction, we're not anticipating any visual or any physical, visual or impact on noise on the setting of tomb clavers. Again, during operation, because of the retention of woodland, we're not anticipating or didn't predict any significant, any impact, I should say, on the setting of tomb clavers. As identified in Dr. Palmer's recognition, during operation, a slight moderate beneficial noise impact on tomb clavers is predicted for the year of opening. For the future year, the significance of noise impact at tomb clavers has been assessed to be slight beneficial. And that's a quote from paragraph 4.6.14 of my recognition. So again, there was no impact during operation, no impact on its setting, no physical impact. So therefore, there would be no impact on the association of it as a landscape feature with Urd House itself. So we did a thorough assessment. The assessment concluded that there was no impact.
Thank you. I think that's obviously something we'll need to come back to with Dr. Palmer's evidence, because the noise is something of concern to the objector group. And may
I just add, Mr. Baxton, sir, in relation to the commitments identified in the environmental statement and as reflected in my recognition in paragraph 4.6.13, because of the concerns of the objector, the promoter undertakes that there will be no site works between chainage 100 and 4,000 on the weekend of the annual commemorations for the Battle of Killiecrankie.
Thank you. Would you nonetheless agree, though, that there has to be more of an impact on the setting of tomb clavers, and indeed on the setting of Lagnabuig with northbound widening, because that's where the construction will take place, rather than the alternative southbound widening?
Well, if we take tomb clavers, no impact has been predicted from northbound widening. So I wouldn't agree that southbound or northbound would have more than southbound. Again, with Lagnabuig, as discussed, given the degree of damage, existing damage to the asset, and also then the nature of retention of woodland, and the expected nature of remains, I don't think I would agree that it would be greater northbound than southbound. I think it's also important that the impact on the whole of the battlefield is assessed with reference to the special qualities and key landscape characteristics.
Thank you. Turning to Rory settlement and Redoubt, you say that in your precognition 4.7 that the Runrory House has been located under the present-day Urd House. I think there's no dispute about that. However, what I was wanting to ask you was that Runrory is not just the house, it refers to the Redoubt as well, and the wall that existed at the time of the battle round the house, which is mentioned by Mackay in his account of the battle. So the importance to the inventory and the importance to historians of Runrory is more than simply the house. It's the house plus the setting and the wall round it.
To address the issue of setting, as defined in the guidance, it's the way in the surroundings of an historic asset or place contribute to how it is understood, appreciated and experienced. While all cultural heritage assets would have a setting, the degree to which that contributes to the value of an asset would vary. For some assets it would contribute more than other. For example, tomb clavers, it would be an important element. The archaeological aspect of that, because there was no burials identified, it's a later feature, are less so. For Runrory it's slightly different in that the archaeological remains contribute more to the value than its setting. So again, on that basis, and as reflected in the environmental statement, we wouldn't have assessed an impact on the setting of Runrory for that, on that basis. There is no physical impact on Runrory. It's located outside the CPO and the LMA. And in addition, and also then the wall towards the end of the battle, Mackay states that there was a wall to the rear of his lines that he considered taking refuge in, but thought better of it because he knew he had no chance of relief, and all that would happen probably would be that he would be surrounded. That's not the current walled garden. The current walled garden is a more recent feature. So that has suggested what the redoubt, or that has led to the idea of a use of a redoubt, and that's in that context what I would understand the term redoubt to mean. It's not that there was additional defences there or anything like that. So therefore, and we understand with reference to Roy's military survey that was likely to be identified immediately around the Runrory as established by archaeological excavation undertaken by Pollard and Oliver, which is located under the current Urd House. So again, that site is no longer extant. That site is not within the LMA or CPO, so there'd be no physical impact on it. The geophysical survey undertaken in the area in 2018 also then suggests that, there's no evidence has been recovered for any form of a redoubt. So while I understand and would have been assessed that Runrory is more than just the building, it would have been the garden around it, again, my assessment would be that there is no impact on that site.
I suppose our point is that the B-listed garden and wall at Urd, which is a contemporary or more contemporary feature, which is built on top of the site of Runrory, is at the very centre of the battle. I don't think you would dispute that, would you? That this area was crucial.
I would dispute with reference to Pollard, and I would disagree, sir, with reference to Pollard and Oliver, that the house, the Runrory house, is located under the current walled garden. It's located under the current Urd House. The Pollard and Oliver undertook excavations and established that. With regard, so therefore, again, as I've just explained, there would be no impact on it. And as we touched on this morning, Urd House, yes, as an historic building, and Urd House garden as a historic walled garden do have an association with the battlefield. That association was assessed, but with reference to it being a historic building that's associated with the battlefield rather than archaeological remains that are more strongly associated with the battlefield.
I suppose my point was more that that line through what is now Arad Garden wall was at the centre of the fighting, was probably roughly where the cavalry engagement took place, where Dundee possibly was killed. So that, even if it's not true, there is an association there which is very important for the battlefield.
I would agree that it is a Rinruri or House is a fixed point within the battle, and enables us to imagine the battle, and is important, a visual connection with the battle. With regard to the cavalry engagement, as detailed within the Killiecrankie battlefield report, the factual report, and let me just find the reference to that, sorry.
The document reference is TS-205.
Document 205. Thank you very much. The concentration of munitions in Field F-13, and especially the concentration of pistol shot and the concentration of carbine shot as well, suggested to Pollard and Oliver that that was the location for the cavalry skirmish you've just identified. Field F-13 is located on the north side of the road, but yes, immediately northwest of Erd House and Walled Garden. The work that was undertaken by Guard Archaeology in 2015 on behalf of the project, again suggested, really supported that, and that is brought out in the Guard report, and it again would suggest that that was the location of the cavalry skirmish rather than in the immediate area of the current walled garden.
So to the north of the current A9?
I would suggest to the north of the current A9, yes. Would it be helpful to show you on a map?
It would, please.
I'm just trying to find a good reference for you. If we were to look at TS-205, and could you just bring up the list of figures, please? I would say figure 2B, please. So figure Field F-13 is marked towards the centre of the figure. Again, the red indicates metal detecting finds undertaken in 2015, while the blue indicates metal detecting finds recovered by Pollard and Oliver. So again, there's a high concentration of munitions in this area, and the concentration of pistol and carbine shot would suggest potentially a cavalry skirmish, and that in the TS-205 is how I would have identified that area. But as you can see, it's located to the north of the road, north of the existing A9.
Does that not demonstrate that the government line, was perhaps a bit further or a bit closer to the existing A9 than you had demonstrated earlier? given the concentration of shot there in those the fields immediately to the north of the existing road?
Not, I think not for me. No, the again, the cavalry would be quite. My understanding would be cavalry would be quite mobile. There always is that either shot was dropped or bounced or rolled, and I don't think the nature of the cavalry skirmish would actually indicate anything about the nature of the front lines, the government lines, sorry, because they would have tried to meet Mackay, the Jacobite cavalry coming down from the northwest. The Jacobite cavalry would have rode out to meet them. So
I'm just interested because you would have expected, if your line was correct and that's where the fighting took place, there might be more evidence in those fields to the immediate south of the existing road.
do you mean fields F5, F6?
Yes.
Well, we understand from Mackay's account of the battle that he left a gap in his line about that area, and in that line he placed his cavalry. So again, the approximate location of the line as you would move northeast, as you would move, say, approximately east to west or left to right across the figure, is approximate, as shown on my later figures, but the evidence from, as we can see from Pollard and Oliver, as rehearsed earlier, the line north to south is more fixed by topography. But my interpretation of the reasons why there's not more shot in areas, well, field F4, it could be to do with preservation, but also as in the centre of his, we understand from historical accounts that Mackay left a gap in his line to enable his cavalry to ride out to attack the Jacobites. So for me that would potentially explain why there's no shot in that area.
Am I right in thinking that your assessments have focused on physical assets and the physical impact and physical objects found in the archaeology, and we've commented on the various assets identified in the inventory, but if we focus on the battlefield as a whole, surely within the battlefield there is an area where the fighting took place that's perhaps not necessarily identified in the inventory, but would you not agree that that is where most people would think that the battle was fought and won, and therefore the deciding or decisive manoeuvres would have taken place in that area?
I don't think I quite follow the question.
I'm just trying to make a distinction between assets which have been mentioned in the inventory, which we've talked about, and the central area of the engagement, which I think we all pretty much agree, although there may be nuances, but we agree took place in the line south of the existing road. That area isn't necessarily identified in the inventory, but it is surely important.
Yes, I would agree with that. And based on I think we would disagree to how far from the evidence presented. I would certainly locate the line of the government forces further south than I think the combined group would have them. But based on the guidance provided by Manage and Change, we have identified a number of both special qualities, which are the archaeological remains. We've included in that tomb clavers, but also we have identified key landscape characteristics, and this, as I stated, is in line with the guidance provided by Manage and Change. Again, it would be probably more beneficial if we could bring up a diagram to show you the locations of those. If we could just scroll down, please, towards the end of the document, there will be figures that show the locations of the special qualities and key landscape characteristics. Yes, thank you very much. So these are the areas of terrain or other areas that are associated with the battle and would have made a significant contribution to the battle. The key identifies what they're identified as, and the environmental statement provides information on what they are. As can be seen, there's quite a large area between the red dashed line and the blue dashed line, which is identified as the southern slopes of Craigellach. So that is in itself a key landscape characteristic. Within those areas are the areas of battlefield terrain that you've identified. During construction, in the environmental statement, we would have assessed the physical changes to those in terms of removal of topography, removal of changes to topography, and during operation we would have assessed the impact of severance of ledge, and how increasing the width of a road and introducing elements of infrastructure associated with the road would have impacted on our ability to understand and appreciate the battle as a whole. And also then would have been the interruptions of views from one side of the battlefield to the other. So, for example, as indicated, so this is an area that's quite open, and you could get an understanding of the Jacobites charging downhill and then meeting the government forces in this area here. So there would be an impact on the legibility in this area between these, not only between the two areas of the southern slopes of Craigellach, key landscape characteristic, but also between the northeast Rinrorie key landscape characteristic, but also then the relationship between that and the southern slopes of Craigellach, key landscape characteristic. So we haven't only assessed physical remains, we have assessed changes on or potential impacts on views across the battlefield, as discussed, where we consider that setting would contribute significantly to the value of an asset, for example, tomb clavers. We would have assessed that as well. So I don't agree we've only looked at physical impacts.
In your opinion, then, that area of fighting doesn't really have any assessment value in its own right, but only in relation to the context of the whole battlefield?
Sorry, which area, sir?
The area of the fighting, the area of the engagement, rather.
So could you give me a field or field numbers for that? Just
well, it's right across the line. The government forces didn't really move. They were engaged by the Highland Charge.
Would you like the pointer, Mr. Bax?
We're looking at this area here, along the government line, and as Mr. Dempsey said, there may be some disagreement amongst historians about exactly where that line was, but I don't think there's any disagreement that the engagement took place along what was the government line. And I'm just interested to know whether he feels there's any intrinsic value in that area as the area of the engagement in its own right, rather than in the context of the overall battlefield, which does spread over a large area.
Yes. I think that's what I was trying to answer your question. This would have been one of the key landscape characteristics. So the line of the government forces, the line of the Jacobite forces, and the area in between was a key landscape characteristic identified within the environmental statement, and would have been one of it's a basis for assessment to enable us to assess the impact on the battlefield as a whole. So yes, I would consider that area has value to the battlefield. I think also, as rehearsed earlier, it lies outside of the proposed scheme.
Thank you. Turning to the alternative design, complete in October 2019, could you just perhaps give us a little bit more explanation of why you changed your overall assessment and now say that the southbound widening would, rather than it wouldn't be a differentiator. Southbound widening is now a differentiator between the two options and would have a more adverse impact on the battlefield.
Yeah, this is dealt with in detail in 4.12 of my precognition. It is due largely, well, if we could take a look at figures K4 and K5 in Appendix K of the development of the scheme report, which is document TS 206. So in this figure, the top viewport is the refined scheme, and the bottom viewport is the alternative design. So as identified in paragraph 4.12.6 of my precognition, during operation of the alternative scheme, there would be a cutting from approximately chainage 1600 to chainage 2160. At its widest point, this would be up to 25 metres wider than the existing A9 cutting at this location. Due to its wide, steep nature and its partial rock face, which would increase its physicality, The cutting is considered to increase the existing severance between the southern part of the southern slopes of Craigellach and northeast Rinrory key landscape characteristics. It is also considered that it would increase the existing severance of the northern and southern parts of the southern slopes of Craigellach key landscape characteristic. In addition, during operation of the alternative scheme, road infrastructure in the form of an embankment, suds feature and access track to the south of the existing A9 between chainage 2800 and chainage 3300, and a cutting between approximately chainage 3100 to chainage 3300 to the north of the existing A9 would be present within the terraces to the south of Mains of Orhill and the level ground to the south of the A9 key landscape characteristic. This would increase the existing severance between the two parts of this key landscape characteristic. So the cross-section shows the cutting I referred to in the first part of that evidence. Taking these impacts on the key landscape characteristics, this is paragraph 4.12.6 and paragraph 4.12.7. Taking the impacts on these key landscape characteristics into account, the impact on Killiecrankie battlefield resulting from the operation of the alternative design has been assessed to be of large significance. It is not believed that the overall effect of severance can be reduced, and therefore the significance of residual impact on the Killiecrankie battlefield during operation has been assessed to remain large. I consider this to be a differentiator between the proposed scheme and the alternative scheme with respect to cultural heritage. So really the presence of that cutting and rock within that cutting is a more physical impediment to understanding the relationship between the key landscape characteristics identified. So it reduces the ability to understand the battlefield and also then reduces the legibility of the battlefield as well. So both the sort of the visual appreciation and the visual connectivity, but also that mental connectivity that I talked about earlier between the two sides of the battlefield. And for me, that is a large impact.
I understand that, but I just wonder what your feeling is about, I think PKHT in the comment they made would actually contradict that to a certain extent. If you turn to TS411, page 16 in the PDF, PKHT's comment there about the dueling options in 14 spot 4 spot 7. I'll just read that out. They disagree with the statement that there will be no impact on public perception and amenity value of the battlefield. Also disagree with the statement there will be no impact on the battlefield landscape. Be further truncation of the intervisible views, upslope and downslope, a key element noted by the inventory. I think the point they're trying to make is that widening on the northbound minimises widening on the southbound minimises this further truncation of the intervisible views upslope and downslope.
I'm not sure that that is correct. If we could go back to the the figure that shows the special qualities and key landscape characteristics, please. I think that it's important to note as well that that's on DMRB Stage 2 rather than the refined design. But the area identified and discussed in the path as identified in the inventory it's the area marked in green as the pass of Killiecrankie. That's how I would understood that comment to be referred to, and it is identified within the inventory rather than the southern slopes of Craigellach and northeast Rory. So I'm not sure that within this context it can be taken to suggest that the assessment is incorrect, and especially since it was made on a DMRB Stage 2 design.
You're right that it would have been DMRB Stage 2, so if I understand your position correctly, then you are giving a high value given the way that the southbound option would require cutting into that rock. You're giving a relatively high value to the northeast terraces up towards Ochil Moor, but relatively lower value of the assets south of the current A9.
Sorry, no, I don't agree with the assessment of value is different. The significance of effect, significance of impact is different because of the physicality of that cutting, because of its width, and because of the presence of rock as well.
So it's the engineering impact on that rock that's important.
It's the resulting cutting decreases our ability to understand one side of battlefield to the other side of the battlefield. It's a long, steep, in my view, cutting, and therefore it just makes it that little bit more difficult to understand one side of the battlefield from the other side of the battlefield.
Could I just ask quickly, I believe there was an objection lodged by Dr. Pollard. Has that been withdrawn?
Not to my knowledge, no.
One second, please. No, I have no further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bix. Mr. Campbell, do you have any questions?
Move around in the documents too much. But if you're tired or you want to stop, you want to rest, just tell me, will you? Please.
Thank you.
I want to focus on the question of measuring the significance of impact on listed assets, designated assets, including the setting of those assets, that being my primary interest here. Now, the first question I'd like to try and get out of the way is that in your precognition, you say that Section 59 strictly doesn't apply because this is not a planning application. But then a little further on you say it's appropriate to have regard to it, or appropriate for Scottish ministers to have regard to it. So although I did object to a question from my learned friend Mr. Milne earlier on, going to ask you something, a sort of same question, but I can get away with that perhaps.
Do you want to object, Mr. Moore?
It's cross-examination, so you can't object. Does the principle which is set out in Section 59 apply here or not?
The principle would apply, but whether and the promoter, I think, is content for that principle to apply. I think the point would be that at DMRB Stage 2 and DMRB Stage 3, a slight impact was identified, so that's a non-significant impact on the setting.
Yeah, without rehearsing the history, though, it's quite a straightforward question. You know what Section 59 says.
Yes.
Is it appropriate, in your professional view, to apply that principle to this application for consent for the draft orders?
It would be appropriate for the ministers to consider it, yes.
Thank you. I asked the question because you differentiated between it perhaps not applying. At one point you say it has been taken into account, and then you said later on it's appropriate for the ministers to apply it. But I think we know where we are now. There's one more question relating to that. In, I think it's 4.4.7 of your precognition, you talk about serious detriment. Now, again, I'll be accused of playing with words, but where does a serious detriment test come from in your lexicon, Mr. Dempsey?
Section 59.3 of the Listed Buildings Act.
I don't think it says serious detriment, does it?
Without serious sex. Do you want?
Can we have a look?
Aye, sorry, sir. Sorry, may I have the first reference you provided me with?
I thought it was 4.4.7, but that is not correct. Maybe it's in TS 211, I can't remember. Anyway, let's look at Section 59.3. In this section, you just read it for me because I can't read it on the wall.
I'm not being facetious. I think I could struggle as well, sir.
Here we go. Oh yes, there it is in the last line, without serious detriment to its character. All right, fine. That's fine. Section 59.3. Now, you also referred us in your evidence in chief to managing change, which is a historic Environment Scotland document, CD 248 for the reporter's notes. That's a piece of advice which has gone through a number of, forgive me, no pun intended, changes. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
2011, 2016, 2018.
Yeah.
Which, of course, coincides to a greater or lesser extent with the different stages of the DMRB analysis.
Although 2018 would be slightly outside.
Well, slightly outside, but we're here in 2020 now. So ministers will be, unless it changes again, ministers will be applying those rules, won't they?
From setting, yeah. From the
about setting.
The guidance, yes.
About setting.
Yeah.
Sorry, not rules, guidance about setting. We're asked to do three things, aren't we? We're asked to identify an asset. Then we're asked to define and analyze its setting. And then we're asked to explore the potential impact of the setting, of the works on the setting, and to see whether negative impacts can be mitigated.
Yes.
Now, identifying a setting ought to be reasonably simple in the case of a building, because we know its dimensions and we know its location. It's less easy, isn't it, in the case of a setting, because a judgment is necessarily involved. And I have have struggled a bit with the various documents that are produced by the promoters to see where it is that you define, that's the word that Historic Scotland use, where you define the setting of our house and the walled garden, which of course are listed together. And the listing is in TS 416.
The setting of Erd House and walled garden would have been described and defined in Appendix 15.1 of the Environmental Statement. That's a cultural heritage baseline information. Attached to that would have been a gazetteer of sites which bring together the information on the sites. And within that, a description was provided for Erd House walled garden, and Erd House setting.
So where would you have us look?
Appendix
15.1 in CD 11.
CD
CD
12.
I beg your pardon.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. I've taken the relevant extracts from that, and they're in my precognition in paragraph 4.20.6.
4.20.6.
Yeah, of my precognition, yes.
Right, so let me just find it, please. It used to be easier when we had ring binders, Mr. Dempsey. I'll just find it in a moment.
Page 70, sir, if that helps.
Yes, no, it's all right. I just need to find it. Now, with great respect, that description there is, of course, a description of the house sitting in next to the walled garden. It isn't a description of the setting of the house, is it?
I would disagree with that. Again, going back to the definition of setting provided by manage and change in the historic environment. Setting is the way the surroundings of an historic asset or place contribute to how it is understood, appreciated and experienced.
Relating that answer then, which I accept for the moment, to what is proposed along the new northbound carriageway, which is what we are concerned with after all, let's not forget that. Is there or is there not going to be disruptive earthworks to part of the setting?
There will be, yes.
Yeah. And do we know for how long there will be disruptive earthworks to that part of the setting?
In terms of the construction period?
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Okay. I ask the question because we can look at what's happening between Lunkerty and Burnham, and we can see widespread earthworks on both sides of the carriageway as you progress through it. And so, inevitably, those who are employing me to be here are looking at that and thinking, well, it's not great to have to live with that for 2 or 3 years. Is that a fair comparison in a layman's mind, do you think?
For me, it would depend on which part of the scheme you're talking about.
Of course.
But I would agree that there would be an impact during construction on the setting of Erd House.
Sure.
And it's Erd House on Erd walled garden, and those are presented in Appendix A 15.4.
15.4, I think.
Yes.
Now, if we needn't go there today, but that is a table of impacts significance of impacts on various assets throughout the scheme. It seems to me, if I read it properly, that the assessment of the impact on Arad House is described either as slight or negligible.
Yes.
And I struggle with that. So I looked to see what slight meant. And there is a helpful table at the outset of, I think, Appendix 15.1.
The DMRB matrix
indeed,
to inform matrix. Professional judgment, yes.
Yes, so it's the sort of matrix that you see in environmental statement advice and landscape and visual impact advice and so on, ranging from major impact to slight or negligible. Are you comfortable with slight as a professional judgment of the significance of impact on Arad House's setting from the from the construction works?
Yes, I am content with that assessment. We, through the description presented in the Gazetteer Appendix A 15.1 and as replicated in my precognition, we have identified what the elements of the surroundings of Arad House which contribute more strongly to its setting and therefore how it's understood, appreciated, etc. Key amongst that is the relationship between the walled garden and the house, and the relationship between the walled garden and the lawn surrounding it, but also then the quite restrictive views between the walled garden and the house, which are
is that fair, Mr. Dempsey?
Which are restricted by vegetation that would be.
You've got a good view of the walled garden from the house, and vice versa.
And that will be retained.
It will be retained. It may be retained, but it will inevitably be impacted upon by what's going on to the east and west.
Agreed.
Not only from the noise characteristics, but also from the visual characteristics.
Agreed.
Because there's got to be earth moving and then the construction of the new carriageway over a longish period.
And they are reflected in the assessment presented in Appendix A 15.4.
Well, what I'm putting to you is that unfairly downgrades the likely impact overall. Slight is not fair. Slight is self-serving on your part. It's too slight an assessment. It's too light an assessment of what the occupants of Arad House can reasonably expect.
In response to that, it was undertaken using professional judgment, and it was undertaken in line with the guidance provided by Manage and Change setting. We have taken into account disruption during construction, but the key elements of the setting of Arad House, as stated, its relationship to the walled garden, between the house and the walled garden, the house and the grounds immediately surrounding it, and the other buildings within it will be maintained.
Well, what will be maintained? Visibility and intervisibility, the possibility of access and access in the other direction, those will all be maintained. But visually, there'll be huge differences, won't there? And in terms of noise, there will be huge differences, inevitably. I mean, you can't build a road quietly.
There will be temporary changes. We have reduced those to the minimum required to construct the road, in my opinion. There, as identified in my precognition and as in Mr. Palmer's precognition, with the mitigation during construction in place, there are not predicted to be any significant noise impacts.
Well, that's just naive, isn't it? I mean, really, Mr. Dempsey, you're an experienced operator in this area. You've given advice on roads before. It's simply not tenable to suggest to the inquiry that there won't be major noise impacts. We'll see what Dr. Palmer has to say, of course, but you know, it's not realistic, is it?
I think it's a assessment based on professional judgment and in line with the guidance.
If we look at that guidance, could you turn up CD-248, please? Go to page 10 of it. I think, sorry. Wait till I find it. Beg your pardon, page 8 of it. Thank you. Got that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. We can see the 3 stages set out there on page 8.
Sorry, page 8, I beg your pardon. Page 8.
Page 8, above a pretty picture of a lighthouse. And then on page 9, we have define and analyze the setting, which you say you've done. And then on page 10, stage 3, evaluate the potential impact of the proposed stages. Now, I appreciate that the advice that you give about noise and so on is somebody else's evidence, and I'm not expecting you to be able to, as it were, analyze that or analyze the fine detail of construction technique, because that's not your thing. But we're only, if it's 200 meters from the house, it's a long way. It's very close, isn't it, for that kind of for a major piece of construction work of that size and extent.
But yes, but again, it's how those works affect the relationship between the key elements that contribute to the setting and therefore the value of the building.
Okay. Look at page 11. 10. In the right-hand column, the sentence beginning factors to be considered. See that?
Yes, sir.
There are 3 bullets there. Whether key views are interrupted, whether the proposed change would dominate, the visual impact of the proposed change. And then it goes on the next page with other criteria. You don't need to read them all out. But all of those are going to happen, and yet your conclusion as the historian is that the impact is going to be slight. Can I put it to you again that that is not realistic, that it underplays what's likely to happen? And given your experience, you know that.
I do not agree that it underplays, that the assessment has underplayed the impact on the setting of a road house. The assessment sets out that there will be impact. The assessment presented in Appendix A 15.4 sets out that there will be impact during construction, noise and visual intrusion, and in line with professional judgment guided by DMRB, that impact during construction has been assessed to be slight.
I know what it says, but we've moved on from what's on the written page. This is the public inquiry.
Sure.
Do you not think, let me put it to you this way, how is the family who live there going to use the back of their house? Let's take something normal, like a picnic or children playing. 200 meters away, there are JCBs and large earth-moving machines with reversing klaxons, the noise of diesel engines, and so on. It's not tenable, is it, to call that a slight impact?
On the setting of the historic building, yes, I would say it is. It's a temporary impact.
Oh, you're talking about the physical setting of the historic building.
Well, I'm talking about the setting of the historic building, yes.
Yeah, well, I'm perhaps guilty of straying into amenity questions, and I'm sorry about that, but nevertheless, you see where I'm going, don't you? It's a difficult proposition to think of that building being used for ordinary domestic purposes while this is going on.
I would say that that's slightly outside the assessment of setting in a historic building.
All right. I'll let you off the hook, Mr. Dempsey. Thank you very much for that. So may I just have a second? That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Just a couple of questions from me, Mr. Dempsey. You've spoken about tomb clavers and how you consider that it doesn't form part of the listing due to age. Have you considered whether it sits within the curtilage of a round house?
I would consider that while it is within the curtilage, the evidence would suggest that it was constructed after July 1948, 1st of July, and therefore isn't automatically curtilage listed. And the discussions that we've had with Person Canals Council or HES one has suggested that it should be listed.
And just one question on Two Men in a Trench, which we've heard and seen quite a lot of today. I didn't mean that pejoratively. Are we taking them as an authoritative source? Can we afford to place a high degree of reliance on their findings?
In my opinion, yes. They've, for want of a better word, gone into print with the result of that. They've also the television programmes still available, but more so, especially with Professor Pollard, there's a number of academic papers, one of which we lodged, sir, which really reflect what is in the Two Men in a Trench book. So it's not just a bit of whimsy for TV. There's a good solid basis. One of the sources identified in the Killiecrankie Battlefield Report, TS205, it's called the Data Structure Report, and it's the more sort of archaeological report based on the works that were done on Killiecrankie Battlefield.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Milne, obviously it would be good to get any re-examination finished tonight. Do you think that's likely?
Well,
and before about 10 to 5, I mean by tonight.
Well, I'm pleased to say I have no questions.
Ah, well. Okay, so no re-examination. In that case, thank you Mr. Dempsey. I think that makes a sensible place to finish for the night. So we'll start at 9:30 tomorrow morning with Mr. Lancaster. Okay, thanks. Good night, everyone.